everybody, I'm Tom Vasel, and welcome to 7 short reviews here from the Dice Tower. We're taking a look at various games. Man, we are running the gambit here today, from pigs fighting in a war, to surfing, to searching for lost kids, to eating waffles. Let's get started with that one. Let's take a look here at Waffle Time. Waffle Time, man, I do love waffles. They're better than pancakes, they're better than French toast, they're better than crepes, barely, but better. And the components for this game are gorgeous. It's about building a waffle from AEG. Let's check it out. At the beginning of the game, players are going to get a card randomly that shows you where you place whipped cream, and you get a couple fruits that you can place on some random spots. You'll then turn this card over where you'll be keeping your syrup over the course of the game. Each round of the game, players will be taking these tokens, and these tokens are in turn order, and if you start later in turn order, you get extra syrup. But you can go to any open circle around the outside of the board, and you're going to be taking the 2 fruits that are closest to you. So this would give you a strawberry and a raspberry. After everybody has gone, whoever is the furthest away, you're going to be moving back here, which will set a new turn order. And then wherever the fork is, that row or column is going to get flipped over, and this is going to move 1 spot. And when it gets all the way back around, that ends the game. Now, players are taking fruit, and they're trying to form these shapes shown here. When players place fruit on the board, so let's say I have a strawberry and banana, and I place them here adjacent to each other, and you make one of these patterns. These patterns can be flipped or moved around or rotated. So you can see here there's a banana, and then 2 other fruits in between them that are not bananas. I have that right here. That lets me take syrup and put a syrup on each of these bananas. Putting a syrup on a fruit is worth a point at the end of the game. Having a syrup on a fruit that's on top of a whipped cream is worth 3 points. But there's even more than that. If you get different syrup patterns out on the board, you'll be able to take one of these butters and place an empty spot on your board. Those butters are worth 2 victory points. But also at the end of the game, you will get victory points equal to, here, for example, every 4 diagonal syrups, every 5 adjacent syrups. And these cards will change from game to game. Whoever has most points is the winner. I am amazed at how stunning the components for this game are. They are beautiful, and it is just a delight to look at on the table. Unfortunately, that is the only delight and good thing I can say about the game. Waffle Time is a typical game in many ways of making polyominoes, except it has this funky, hey, move around here, take 2 fruit, put those 2 fruit next to each other. You make these shapes, you then put syrup on them. That syrup gets points for you at the end of the game. But there's a lot of problems with it. The biggest one being it is absolutely stunningly boring. Secondly, all that moving around the outside and keeping your flow of syrup high doesn't really mean anything. You get some points in any game if you use up all your syrup, but that's really difficult. I think you should almost win the game if you pull that off. And then the blackberries, their polyominoes are easier to complete than everyone else. Once people figure that out, blackberries will always be taken. The turn order is important, but also not important. But at the end, you're putting things out, trying to score a few points. You get a few points at the end of the game, and you're like, what did we just do? Let's go eat waffles, which that's what I would recommend over playing this one. I just didn't like this one at all, unfortunately, so a 4 out of 10. Hey, let's catch the perfect wave. This is a surfing game. In fact, we played this one live on the Dice Tower if you want to watch how it works. This is a game in which you're playing cards face down. Eventually they'll be flipped up, and then you get to surf that wave. Let me show you. Each player is going to have one of these boards in front of them with a little surfer person that's going to be moving along the bottom. You also start with a couple of wax tokens. And players were going to have 2 actions on their turns, and what they're doing is they're trying to build, well, the perfect wave. And you're going to do that by placing numbers. Now, when you place numbers, they're going to be face down on the board, but at the end of the game, you'll reveal them. So a perfect wave is numbers that go up in value or stay the same. So if I played a 7 here, this 7 isn't going to count. But then I have 6, 6, 7, 8, 10. That is a nice wave. However, that wave won't work unless I get my surfer all the way out to the end of it. If they only got here, my wave is just going to be a 6, 6, 7. For your wave, if you have it completed at the end of the game, you're going to get the points that are underneath it. You'll also get points if you have a run. So here I have a 6, 7, 8. So that's going to give me some extra points. Or a set if I had 3 of the same number in a row. For example, 6, 6, 6. That would also give me bonus points. And then also tricks. So there are trick cards that you can play over the course of the game. So we will also be placing those face down. You can place one above the board here. Each of these will give you points if you meet the requirements. This says if there's no adjacent tricks. So that's 20 points. Well, now it's worth nothing because there's a trick here. This one's 10 if it's above an even number. Now, the way the game works is on a player's turn, they have two actions. They are going to be taking cards from here. There's going to be a face-up display of both the trick cards and the cards below it. You can take these cards and either add them to your hand or immediately play them on the board. Once a card's played, you can't play it anymore. Those paddle out cards are just discarded and they'll move your surfer up one. You can also spend a wax token to move your surf token forward. When you move this forward, remember you need to have it forward to score, but you also may only play cards at its spot or to the right. Once the surfer has passed an empty spot on the board, you can no longer play cards in that spot. There's a few other actions that you can do. You'll notice some endgame scoring cards are worth 50 points. You can use your whole turn to put one of these surfboards under it, and then that one will score for everybody. Each player will also have a secret one in their hand that they can score at the end of the game. At the end of every turn, these two cards are wiped away. The cards over here will move out. A new card is added to the end, and it's the next person's turn. If this deck runs out, it's reshuffled. If this deck runs out, the trick deck, then the game end is triggered, and we add up points for each person's wave. Highest points is the winner. The perfect wave is almost what I would call a mass market game. Like this is a game that could be played at Walmart, or not played at Walmart, but bought at Walmart. It's really easy to teach people. It has some similarities, maybe a little bit to Racco, because what you're doing is you're collecting cards and putting them out in front of you. And there's some interesting decisions about when to take those paddle out cards, or you can skip an action or skip two actions to take one of those wax tokens, which you can then use later. How fast should you paddle out? If you paddle out too fast, you don't get to play the cards and the waves that are behind you, but also if you don't paddle out, you're not going to score your wave. It's an interesting game. There's a little bit of fiddliness in discarding those last cards, and honestly, and I don't say this about many games, I think it's a little shorter than I would prefer. Most of the time when you play this with people who've never played before, and I've played this several times, but if you've never played before, that first time you might not make a good enough wave to come home on. But you're like, oh, I should have paddled my guy out. There's a few things that it takes a little bit of knowledge in there. After that, though, it is a fine game. It is very easy to talk while you're playing this game. You'll be constantly moving the cards and placing stuff. There's a little bit of interaction, but not a ton. And it's just it's a nice, pleasant game. It's not one I want to play all the time. I'm giving it a 6.5 because it's almost there for me. But surfing is a very exciting sport. This game does not feel like you're doing something very exciting. It's more about calmly. It's more of a Zen type experience. And I think some people would enjoy that. And I'll play it. It's just that I don't know that I would be the one necessarily to suggest it. So that's Perfect Wave. Snakes of Wrath. When this game was on Kickstarter, I was very intrigued by it, mostly because I really liked how it looked on the board. And when I opened up the box for the first time, I was very pleased because these are essentially domino tiles that you're going to be placing on the board. It is a two-player game, red snakes versus blue snakes. Let me show you. This tile is going to start in the middle of the table, and each person is going to get a tray with tiles of your color. So if you're on the blue, every tile is two-sided. So I'm the blue player here. So they're blue on my side, and the ones that attack my opponent, I'll keep them on the red side. So this is what my tile tray would look like. Game comes with a huge tile bag, and good luck trying to get it back in the box because everything is shrink wrapped in that box at the beginning. It ain't going to fit there at the end. On your turn, you are going to either add and make your snakes bigger. So the tiles are always placed in the same orientation as the other ones. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to complete a snake. Now this one is not going to be completed anytime soon because I built this here. I can close that head off here. I can close that head off here. And finally close this head off. Now this snake is completed because as we all know, snakes have multiple heads. This would score me a point for each body one, 3 points. The first person to get 13 points is the winner. There is this little snake called Todd you can play somewhere. He's worth just 1 point. But other than that, you need to complete them. Now, if your opponent plays a tile, so let's say my opponent has a snake here like this. They start building one there. And you can play the exact same body part on top of it to break that snake. That snake, they're going to have to heal it by placing the same body part on it. If a snake piece has armor on it, you can see the little shields here, and there's a little bit of armor here, then that piece cannot be broken. Another way to mess somebody up is, let's say, for example, that this was set up like this, and as the red player, they might be able to attach a tile in such a way that connects this head and attaches to the blue one. Or if you have a snake of your own color and you just make it spin around. So maybe the snake, I'm going to slowly have this color come around. Well, that's not going to do it anyway. But let's say you do. I play this one here that connects it. Now this whole snake will be turned over and it becomes red. Now you can't attack a completed snake, and you can't attack an armored snake, the armored part of a snake. But once you finish a snake, that snake is done. You'll score points for that. The first person to get 13 points is the winner. So you're playing a tile, drawing a tile. This game is fine. In fact, because it's so nice, other than fitting it in this box, come on, that's ridiculous. I'm giving it a 6 out of 10. I don't dislike it at all, and it is mild, but it is just essentially play styles out. Make your snakes long, cut other people's snakes off. Maybe you work ahead a little bit. If you've played games like Carcassonne, this is like Carcassonne with just the roads, sort of. You got to kind of like the theme a little bit, the little snakes going back and forth around the board. This is another game that I think would sell really well, like at Walmart, and maybe that is where I think I saw it at Target, for example. It's a fine little game. I just don't know that it is one that I'm going to want to play. It's more of a mindless, put out snakes, watch them go around. I broke your snake. No, you didn't. Oh, I connected the snakes. There's some neat ideas in it, but it is very, very, very basic. It says ages 13 plus on here, but goodness, I think even kids could play this one. So that is Snakes of Wrath. Here's a little game about Aztec lore called Nawali. And in this game, you're building a little deck of cards, and then you're playing against another player. Now, this says 2 to 4 players, but it is essentially a 2-player game that can be played with people next to each other. In fact, a lot of this game is going to have some similarities to collectible card games or trading card games. I'll show you. At the beginning of Nawali, you are going to pick a Nawal, and by the way, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing these names here. So you'll start with one of these, and then you're going to be drafting a small deck, or 2 decks actually. One has items and magic spells, and the other has these little creatures that you'll be using to attack your opponent with. Players are going to have a handful of the cards between the different creatures and the different items. And you're going to have this energy that you're going to be getting every turn, and you can save it from turn to turn. You'll be playing these creatures in one of these 4 lanes where on future turns they will be attacking the other person across the lane from them, and if there's no one there, you'll be taking some of these gems. The first person to get all the gems is the winner of the game. Each of these creatures has some tokens on it. Over here you can see their life, so once their life is all gone, they're defeated. This is the energy it costs to bring them out on the board, and this is their attack power. Each creature also has special abilities. This is water, so we would look at this little sheet here, find water on here. So water, there it is. Attacking does 1 extra damage to adjacent rivals. When I attack, it would also do 1 damage to adjacent rivals. You can add items. So this here, the Bone Thorn, this adds 2 attack and also adds death. And so let's pull this back up and look up what death means. You can also bring out your Nawal by paying a certain amount of energy, and they're going to be out on the board and be a powerful creature for you. And that's how you play. Okay, so before we start here, I want to say a couple things. First of all, I think the theme is neat. I think the art for that theme is neat, and that's cool. But this game has one humongous flaw for me. And this flaw makes me not want to play the game. And that is that symbology. And I showed you as I was going through the overview there, like, well, what does this symbol mean? Look for it on that card. What's hilarious to me is the symbols, which then on that card, they're so small and hard to read on that card. They could have just printed the stuff on that card on the cards themselves. But you're never going to remember what all these symbols mean. Fire, water, earth, whatever. And I need to know what they all mean at all times. This game is a very tight game of a back and forth, putting cards in the lanes. Like I said, it feels like a collectible card game because there's a lot of collectible card games that have this lane action. And then you hit, and if someone's not there, you take some of those stones in the middle, which is like hurting your opponent's life totals. And it's small, And yes, I think a lot of this game is going to come down to that draft of cards that you do at the beginning of the game and knowing the game really well. But it's going to take many, many games to get to that point. I think the symbols really hurt it. And so I don't think I can really recommend it. There's some neat ideas in here, but it just didn't jive for me at all. It was too hard to play. And the game itself, which is kind of just move and attack and play cards and make your guys better, there's so many of those out there. The only thing that's really differentiating this one is the theme, and that's fine. I think that's a cool theme, but if you take that out of the game and leave the game mechanisms with the very difficult to figure out how everything works, then it drops it to a 5 for me. So Nawali is not one that I would recommend. All right, who likes sardines? Well, that's what this game about here. Lata is about, the Portuguese canning industry starting after World War II, because, hey, canning sardines is an important thing, and it's an important project, and I like that. I love the cover of this. Pythagoras Games these days is making their games look really fantastic, and this one is no exception, with one, well, there's one exception there, actually. We'll get to that after I show you how to play. Players are going to have 9 actions that they'll be using each round of the game, and they're going to be bidding these for turn order. And then in turn order, they're going to be picking from groups of cards. So the first group, you'll be adding cards to your factory. And it's free to add them to these first 2 spots, but if you want to add them to these spots, you're going to have to pay money. But whenever you take cards, you have to add them, so you might even replace a card that you already have in your factory. Once they've done that, players are going to produce. And so sardines can just be canned by themselves. This guy needs some olive oil, so I don't have any olive oil, but if there was olive oil on the card next to him, I could then make him olive oil, and hey, I got another sardine here. Then, after players have taken cards and run their factories, they're going to be able to sell. There'll be some of these cards out here, and you'll be able to sell to these different spots on them, which will give you money. The person who puts the final one there takes the card and will give them this flag, which could be worth points at the end of the game. To sell requires an action for each card that you sell to, so if you bid too many actions to go first in turn order, you might not have enough actions to sell to these cards. And then the last thing that players do on a round is they're going to be spending money to buy point cards, and these will give you, this one for example gives 2 points for every 2 flags you have at the end of the game, 4 for every tomato that you can see in your factory at the end of the game, and there's all different point values. This one's just 7 points. And then you repeat and you'll run this again. And after a certain number of rounds, you'll take the point cards that you have, plus you get points for every flag that you've done, and whoever has the most points is the winner. This game here, I'm giving this one a 6 out of 10 because it's almost what I want. But there's 2 problems. One is kind of a mix. It's an esoteric game. It really is. You really have to kind of put your mind, this game does not do things that other board games do, which is good and bad, right? You're taking these cards, you're putting them into a factory, you're then running that factory. You have to put the cards in a factory, which means you have to pay money. And if you don't have money, then you have to cover up the spots without money. And then you're combining 2 cards next to each other for cubes, which I'm telling you, for some people I thought was really a difficult thing to understand. It's just not very intuitive. Then you take those cubes and you sell them in markets, and then you'll be buying victory point cards, and all this will cost actions. And so the number of actions that you take and spend is going to be a big deal. When you run your factory, each card that you run is an action, and so you bid actions, and you have actions run your cards, and you have actions, so you kind of have this currency. And all that works together, I think, to make a decent game. But because it's so weird and out there, I'm not 100% sure a lot of people are going to like it. There's going to be a lot of people who will come and say, this is a really cool, clever game. But I don't know that it does stuff better than bigger games. The designer of this game is very creative. I mean, the games that he has done, I'm just always impressed with his neat ideas. And this has some neat ideas in it. The bigger problem with this game is I really, really dislike that initial bidding part of the game. Because going first in this game is a huge advantage. And I should mention there's a variant where you can basically bid around the table spending actions. And that's a much better variant, because if I bid a certain amount of actions and you bid higher than me and you go first, I've still lost those actions, and it just doesn't feel that great because you're going first a bunch of times. And that really kind of tainted the rest of my view of the game, because going first in this game is a bigger deal than almost any other game I've played in a long time. And then the victory point cards do not feel balanced. I could be wrong on that, but some of them are like, hey, you get points for cards that are face up, and those cards might never show up, or someone else might take them, while this card is just worth 7 points. A much clearer thing. But who gets a 7-point card? The person who went first. So there's a lot of interesting ideas here. I love the theme. I love the look of the game. I like the ideas in the game, but it just falls short for me. I'll play it, but I'm playing with the variant, first of all. And then after that, I'm like, I don't know. This game is stretching my brain in weird ways, and I don't know that the payoff is as strong as I want it to be. So that's why it's a 6 out of 10. That's Lata. Hogs of War is a 2-player game that's based on the PlayStation title, which I've never played. It came out 2000, so 23 years ago. But I'm still interested in games where you get to fight. And this one takes the World War I motif, and it's not the first game to do this, and makes it cute by having pigs fight each other that are chibi-looking pigs. In fact, this game looks very much like a CMON game. It is not, though. So this is a 2+ player game, but it's mostly a 2-player game, and like war games often are. So I'm going to give you a real brief overview. We'll be right back. In Hogs of War, you're going to pick a scenario from a campaign book that you're going to play, which will use this board, and you'll put terrain on the board to set it up. Each player is going to be picking their army, so there are lots of different units that you can use for your army. You're going to choose which of them at the beginning of the game. They have different stats on them. One of the nicest is it shows what kind of weapon somebody has. So this shows what dice you roll in what range. It also talks about them moving and some special abilities. These little sausage here are different actions that players can take. And then this is the cost of them in oil, the resource of this game. So there's going to be a lot of these different units. You're not going to be able to use all of them in any specific game. And so you're going to pick which ones. Maybe I want the aqua tank, or do I want the armored car? Players have a shield that they're going to have in front of them where they're going to keep track of some of the stuff they're doing. They also have this home territory, and this area is it's on the board, it's represented by a hex, but you'll be building buildings in here, and these buildings are going to give you access to upgrades, to new units. At the beginning of the game, you're only going to have your grunt units that you're going to be able to send out on the board, but by building more buildings as the game goes by, you're going to be able to get new units out. You'll also be able to give unit upgrades. So you'll look through here, and here I can buy an upgrade for my airplane. Here, these are all for the airplane. Maybe for my vehicle here, for a ground vehicle, I want to buy a fire extinguisher. Cattle prods, bayonets. I can add this to the grunts only. And then it just adds an extra red die when they're one distance away from everybody else. So the game itself is going to be taking back and forth, turn to turn. First, you'll have a base phase where you'll be adding new buildings to your base or repairing things because the enemy airplanes might fly over and blow up some of your buildings. Then there is a whole aerial phase. This is where you will hide your airplane cards behind here. You're going to pick some speed information and what direction your airplanes are going to go. And then after that, the ground phase. Each of the different units that players have different initiative orders on them, and you'll be running them around the board and possibly shooting at each other. The game has different colored dice, like I already showed you, that have hits on them or extra big hits, or some of them will affect vehicles. There are different types of dice, but they're all pretty similar, although some might cause burning like this one does here. Your goal is to control different spots on the board. Sometimes you want to control spots on the board because they give you more oil, which will let you put out more resources, but there are some that are worth points. And each scenario needs a certain number of points to win. Like, for example, here if you have a faction capture token on the central spot, you get 3 points. And so the first person to get to a certain number of points is the winner. And each scenario has some minor changes to it, but they all play fairly similarly. Okay, so there's a lot that I like about this game. But before I get that, I'm going to tell a couple things that knock it down. One, I don't think the rulebook is as clear as it could be. When you go into a game like this, everything needs to be spelled out, and some of the things in this rulebook are like, yeah, I think you understand this. Like, I get buildings at the beginning of my turn. How much do they cost? Where's the resources to build them? No, you just get a building. You do? That again, I would have just spelled that stuff out more clearly in there. But once you get past that, Hogs of War is essentially an RTS, a real-time strategy game, on a board because you're building buildings, and then you produce units from those buildings, and then the units run across the board, then they get shot and they die, and then you bring out more units. You're trying to control different spots on the board. You're sending your plane over the board. That is my other small caveat. The plane mini game is like, woo, but it is a mini game. And then it's like there's like whole sections of rules about the plane moves this way, and the plane's pretty powerful, and you're driving over here and shooting stuff. And you'd be like, we're not going to use aerial warfare on my side. Yeah, you're going to want to because the planes are pretty powerful. And then there's anti-aircraft guns, and all that feels like almost an extra game put on top of it. But I still liked it. I still thought it was fun. There's a lot going on, and it is a pretty big game, but at the same time, it's kind of small. You're just building units. It's fun to pick all the different upgrades. The dice system is very easy and good to use. So that brings it into something I find to be enjoyable. So I'm giving this one a 7 out of 10. This game is one I was very excited about. It's a cooperative storytelling game set in a world of Slavic mythology where appearances may be misleading and it's not always easy to tell good from evil. That's the back of the box. But I was excited about it because, hey, it's Slavic mythology. And there's not a lot of games that do it. It's also 1 to 7 players. So I'm going to show you just a bit and we'll be right back. This is not a full overview. I just want to give you a little bit of an idea of what it's like to play this game. Players are going to be various characters, and these characters are going to come with some stats that they have. There's running, hiding, fighting, and communication, and you'll have little clips here to keep track of bonuses that you get to them. You also have spots here to keep cards. It's a nicely put together thing here. You also have a bag where you'll be able to put more cards from various decks. There are a lot of different decks in the game, and you're going to be moving across this board. Now the board, unfortunately, is kind of like a Candyland style board. There'll be tokens around here for enemies to come, and you'll be flipping tokens over when you find them. And when that happens, you'll be going to the Book of Encounters, where they will have stories about all these different people here. And it's really fascinating stories. And then when you get to them, you're going to need to either run, hide, fight, or communicate with them, and then you'll be successful or not, and then it will tell you a little bit about what happens. The whole time you're doing this, you're searching for some kids who are running around. The rule book is here. It's not particularly clear. We'll come back to that later. You're also going to have this board keeping track of whether it's day or night and who you might run into. The rest of this box has all these encounter cards in here and different things like you might run across a turtle, or you might run across this magic object, or there are leaves or things that you can find. And then here are different events that might happen. And then the rest of the box is miniatures. I'm just showing you the cards here. Here are the clips that you stick on the cards. And then underneath that are all the different miniatures for the game. And over here are the big miniatures. And then a cup with dice that you roll with different symbols that you might need for various encounters that you have. So it's a cooperative game. You're trying to go find these kids, bring them back without, these monsters causing you a lot of grief and pain. Okay, let's start with the Slavic mythology part. Really well done. The production is pretty good. The box here could have been dropped a bit. I think there's too many components for the game, but this book, and you look at the artwork in it, I mean, wow, that's really cool. There's different creatures that you'll run into. These kids, I feel bad for these kids that are out there. They're going to get gobbled up by all these monsters and things like that. This game, though, doesn't ever feel like a game. And it feels like you're moving some pieces around, and then you'll eventually pop into one of these encounters, and then you look at the encounter, you're like, well, this creature, you can run from it, fight it, or communicate with it, but the easiest thing to do from it is hide. Then we're going to hide. And that's where I think it's a problem, because yes, there might be some things. Sometimes they'll be like, do you have this card? I'm like, no. We never randomly drew that card. The card draw is like crazy random. Running into the monsters is random. So the randomness is a big problem for me in this game. But another big problem for me in this game is that, yes, it's neat. The first time you get to this witch, you can read this whole thing. And then you interact with her. And then the next time you run into the witch, guess what? It's the same thing all over again. So this is almost a one-time playthrough. Maybe not, because I don't think you'll run into all the creatures each time. There's a lot of text, a lot of stuff. But it's covering up the fact that there's really a bare bones game here. I don't know that my decisions matter much at all. There's these, find items and stuff, and sometimes you just, the luck is really bad, and the rules are terrible, frankly, on how to play the game. It's a very, very bad rule book. So all that mixes together to be a game I cannot recommend here. There's a lot to like about this game. It's a beautiful production in many ways, but I have to give this one a 5 out of 10 because there's just not the game there to back up the cool mythology that's in it, which really makes me sad. So there you go, folks. 7 short reviews. I hope some of them are good, some of them not so good, but definitely a weird mix in there. By the way, if you enjoy these short review roundups or you just want to watch the reviews by themselves, we put these out separately on a different channel called Dice Tower Encore, where the reviews are by themselves in case you want to check them out. Anyway, until next time, I'm Tom Vasel. I hope you have a great day, and you've been watching the Dice Tower.